Ever start dating someone where everything was going a little too well? So you start worrying for no reason whatsoever. Nobody could be that perfect. And even if they were, then there's no way that they would look twice at you. The only logical explanation is that they aren't as perfect as they pretend to be, which leaves you playing detective, trying to figure out the catch. Maybe all those little quirks that you found adorable are now going to drive you crazy in a few months. Maybe she even has a dark secret. You know, hard drugs or hating dogs. Or that one time she killed a man with a stiletto heel in a fit of passionate rage. There's an easy solution if you want to find out who someone really is. Take a long-ass road trip with them. If you're still together by the end, then it was meant to be. My girlfriend, I'll call her Emily for the sake of the story, somehow thought it was a good idea to drive 1,000 miles together, across the country, after we've only been dating for 2 months. We're both pretty busy with work and don't get to spend much time together, so naturally being locked up in a prison cell on wheels for 2 days straight was going to be an improvement. First 100 miles? So far so good. Holding hands, singing to the radio together, uncontrollable laughter when she found out that I knew all the words to Skater Boy. Sue me, it's a catchy song. And if the road ended there and we turned around, we might have lived a long and happy life together. It was when we passed the hitchhiker that everything began to fall apart.
Let's give him a ride.
Emily said, squeezing my hand.
We'll be on this road forever anyway.
We don't even know where he's going, I told her. He's probably just going to rob us and steal our car anyway. Which is true of everyone you don't know, and most of them you do, as far as I'm concerned. His clean-pressed suit didn't reassure me either. That just meant he had successfully robbed someone before me, which actually made him even more dangerous. The guy didn't even have a sign or anything. He was just sitting by the freeway ramp, spastically waving his thumb like he was guiding an airplane to land. It was my turn to drive, and I just sailed right past. Emily and I started bickering after that. She thought I wasn't, what was the word? Compassionate. And I thought she was reckless. It took about 10 minutes before she finally dropped it, although it wasn't because she conceded.
Hey look, there's another one.
Sitting by the side of the road, waving his thumb like it was the end of the world. It wasn't another one, though. It was the same guy. I'm sure of it. Only this time, he looked like he had been out there for a few days. His suit was streaked with dirt and his hair was greasy. There was a desperate strain on his face, like a proud man trying to conceal his embarrassment. It wasn't just my imagination either. Emily recognized him too.
How do you think he got here so fast?
She wondered. I don't know, and I don't care, I said. This trip is supposed to be about us, so let's not get distracted, okay? My car blew past him and I stayed the course. We started arguing again, and even when we agreed to drop it, the argument just slithered into new topics. She hated my music. I hated how judgmental she was. I was controlling. She was picking fights over nothing. It kept getting worse until we saw something that shut both of us up real fast. The hitchhiker again. Another 20 miles down the road from where we had seen him last. The bottom part of his shirt and jacket were ripped to shreds, and blood was soaking through a concealed stomach wound. He was stumbling along the side of the road, weaving erratically, wandering straight onto the highway at times before pitching off to the side. Emily could not believe that I didn't stop. I couldn't believe that she still wanted me to. I was starting to feel really uneasy by this point, and the stress of our arguing was only making it worse. She kept yelling about he was hurt and needed help. She refused to even acknowledge how weird it was that he kept getting ahead of us. She almost caused an accident by grabbing my wheel when I refused to turn around. We drove for the next 50 miles in silence. I turned the radio back on, but she snapped it back off immediately. It wasn't until I pulled off for gas when we saw him again. Face down on the side of the road. Shirt and jacket gone. Long, even, bloody gashes from his shoulders down his back. Almost like bear claws or something. I stopped the car and parked behind him. Emily jumped out and knelt beside the body. She looked up at me with uncomprehending rage burning behind her eyes. Like this was somehow my fault.
He's dead.
She said, standing up.
Can I call this into the police, or is that too much of an inconvenience for you too?
I nodded, absolutely numb. I filled up on gas while she waited with the body until the police arrived. They asked us a few questions, but neither Emily nor I felt comfortable explaining that this wasn't the first time we had seen him. They took our information and let us get back on the road after about 15 minutes. The car was silent for a long time after that. It was starting to get dark and I kept suggesting places to spend the night. But Emily just shrugged and stared out the window. At the rate we were going, we'd break up by the end of the trip and I wanted it to be over as soon as possible. I just kept driving, long after the sun went down. Emily fell asleep around midnight, but I still continued driving. She was so pretty like that. And everything was going so well before this. It was just so frustrating that such a random event that neither of us could predict would destroy us like this. By around 2 a.m., I was getting pretty tired. But I decided not to give up. Maybe if she woke up and we were already there, then she would see how hard I worked for her. Maybe then we'd still have a chance to patch things up. I caressed her hand and she returned the pressure. I flirted with the thought that everything was going to be okay. At least until she woke up and started screaming. There wasn't any safe shoulder to get off on the highway, so I had no choice but to keep driving. She shut up quick enough, but it was still about 10 seconds of hysterical breathing before she could even explain what was going on.
Behind you! In the back seat!
I glanced back, then back at the road, then back again. The hitchhiker was in my back seat, naked, filthy, covered with black blood and old wounds. His elbows rested on his knees as he leaned towards us. Evidently still alive as he cocked his head to the side to regard me curiously.
What are you doing? Pull over!
Emily started screaming again. I can't! Get him out!
Did you go back? What is he doing here?
I don't know. Open the door or something. I slowed down gradually and put my flashers on to warn the cars behind me. The hitchhiker reached around behind Emily and grabbed her by her throat. I slammed my fist into his arm and I felt something give way under the soft, rotting flesh. When I lifted my hand, I could see a black bone from his forearm protruding straight through the skin. He didn't seem bothered by it in the least. She was crying as the dirty fingers dug into her throat, pushing through her skin like it was made out of dough. She was thrashing so hard that one of her flailing fists smashed straight through the window. I managed to safely stop the car, but there was nothing I could do to break the indomitable grip on her neck. I jumped out of the car and ran around to the back seat with the hitchhiker. Maybe if I had a clear shot at him, I could drag him out. I flung open the door and lunged inside, falling face first onto an empty seat. I thought he had already escaped somehow, and ripped open the passenger side door. Emily was gone too. If it wasn't for the blood and the broken window, I would have thought I had gone completely insane. I spent the next hour searching the surrounding area with my flashlight. They were both gone without a trace. I considered calling the cops, but I realized that if I wasn't already a suspect after the first body was found, then I'd definitely be one now that I was soaked in blood and my girlfriend was the one to disappear. All I could do was get back on the road. drive home, and never tell another soul about what had happened. That was my plan. It wasn't a good plan, but it was all I had. And I would have done it too, if I hadn't just passed Emily standing by the side of the road. Clean, healthy, waving her thumb enthusiastically in the air. That was a few miles back. But I stopped to write this because I don't know what to do from here. If I see her again, do I pick her up? Or do I just keep on driving and hope for the best? Many of us live careless lives, second by second, moment to moment. We know deep down that our behavior is destructive. We know we are slowly killing ourselves, and we think that our vices are too powerful for us to control. To stop is not a battle you win once. It's a continuous struggle that will never end. So we don't stop. We take another sip of an alcoholic beverage, another drag of a cigarette, another bite of something we shouldn't. I used to think it was impossible for me to control it, but that was just weakness. It was an escape. I know that now. I was 52 years old when I had my stroke. Doctors had warned me for years to get my weight under control, but they never got through to me. I have eaten whatever I wanted whenever I wanted for as long as I could remember. I was most certainly a big guy, but not excessively obese like those you see who can no longer walk unguided. My overall appearance didn't reflect just how unhealthy I was. My wife, my children, all grown up now. My friends, coworkers, everybody. They always tried to get me to eat better. I never listened. I wasn't even trying to change. I did what I wanted to do, living moment to moment. I was home alone when I felt the symptoms. The right side of my face became completely numb, my vision blurry. I was confused. I tried to take out my phone, but it dropped to the ground. I tried to speak, but just a moaning sound came out of my mouth. I remember standing up and trying to walk across the room. I was dizzy. The last thing I remembered was crashing into the ground. And then, I awoke in the hospital. My family was in there with me. I already saw it written all over their faces. We told you this would happen. Why didn't you listen to us? You could have easily prevented this. I tried to speak, but found I had very little control over my voice. I said hello, but they could barely even make it out. My eldest son held my wife as she started to cry. I tried to sit up, but I found I could barely even move. I moaned. My eyes moved to my daughter, but she immediately turned away. She couldn't even bear to look at me. They were ashamed of me. I had chosen fast food over them. Sugar-ridden cola. Cake with 3 layers of icing. A doctor came into the room. Although I had very little control over my motor skills, I understood things perfectly well. The doctor explained that I had suffered a serious hemorrhagic stroke. There was a lot of blood still leaking into my brain, and I would require immediate surgery. He told me there was only a 60% survival rate, but that I had no choice. My family had already decided for me. I remember going into the operating room. I saw my wife take my hand, but I couldn't feel it. "We're not saying goodbye," she said. "I'll see you tomorrow," she smiled at me. but I could see how forced it was. I could see how scared she was, how disappointed in me she was. It's what I was thinking of when I went under, the disappointment in my wife's eyes. When I awoke, I could immediately feel that the surgery wasn't successful. Sure, I had survived, but it had damaged me much further. My thoughts were hazy now. I had trouble concentrating. I needed guidance for breathing. I had trouble looking around the room. I could no longer speak in any manner. I couldn't wheeze, I couldn't cough. I couldn't move. And in some places the numbness was replaced by agony. I don't know why or how, but the pain on my right side was excruciating. The amount of heat and pressure was unbearable, and I had no way to communicate it to the doctors. I tried to convince myself that it would get better, but it didn't. It maybe even got worse. I had nothing to pass the time. I was in far too much pain to ever really sleep. It was torture. Days passed before my family even came to visit. I guess they had already given up on me. It felt like they were only partly even there. They could barely even look at me. I saw the pity and disappointment in their eyes. It felt like it wasn't even really them, you know. These were not the people that I knew so well and that I loved so much. They made me feel worse whenever they came. I started to dislike when they visited me at all. Weeks passed. The pain never subsided. The visits never became more bearable. With no other distractions, my mind went to strange places. I would think back to those times that I would order 2 desserts after eating a large meal. It's just desserts, I would often quip. I thought back to when I would laugh at those who suggested I should maybe have a salad for dinner. Those times when I was home alone with no one watching, and I would eat until I was physically sick. That is what did this to me. I couldn't escape it. I dwelled on it more and more as time passed. How I would secretly order fast food on the way home from work before eating the healthy home-cooked meal prepared by my wife. The amount of sugar I put in my coffee. It started to consume me. It's all I could think about. Donuts, French fries, and gravy. The thought of them made me sick now. Sick. The horrific pain in my side never went away. Ice cream, milkshakes, my family staring over me in my bed. The things they said, the look in their eyes, fried chicken, double fudge brownies. It's just dessert. It was unbearable. It would never end. Ever. And that's when he arrived in my room. I knew right away he was a man, but that he also wasn't. That's the best I can explain it. I'm not going to describe him because I think he would look different to everybody. He smiled at me. A smile that I wanted to trust, but I knew I couldn't. "Well, my goodness. How are you?" he asked me. His tone reeked of sarcasm. I couldn't respond. "I know what consumes your thoughts." His smile widened. "I know the pain you feel." I stared at him. There was little else I could do. "I can end it, you know. I have that power. Would you like all of this to end?" I didn't care who he was or what the price was. I was in agony. I would have done anything. "This is the deal I have to offer. I'm going to fix you, almost back to normal. You'll even have another 15 years or so. Good years." That sarcastic smile appeared back on his face. "But it comes at a price. A perpetual price. I won't say any more about it." He looked me up and down. "Ooh, I know how much it hurts. I know how unbearable it is. But I must warn you, This is your only chance. If you agree, there is no going back. But if you decline, I won't ever return. I know you can't speak, but just think it to yourself. Yes or no? I'll know. It's up to you." That smile never left his face. I know how it sounds. How foolish it seems to make such a deal. But I chose in pure desperation. I couldn't bear another second of that pain. Whatever he had in store for me couldn't be much worse than this. I looked at him, and I thought as hard as I could. "Yes. Excellent," he said. He then snapped his fingers. I immediately felt much better. I sat up in the bed. I could talk again. I wasn't completely back to normal, but I was feeling much better. "I'll see you in 15 years, he told me as he started walking away. "Wait!" I shouted after him. He stopped. He turned around. "What's going to happen to me when I die in 15 years? In perpetuity? Can you at the very least tell me?" He laughed out loud and shrugged his arms. He was looking around the room, up and down. "Wait, what do you mean?" I asked. He was turning and walking away, but it started to dawn on me. These past few weeks weren't real. Me, in this hospital room, it was just a foreshadowing of what my eternal torment would be. Such pain. The souls of my family coming to visit, looking on in terror, pity, and disappointment. That's where I would be, forever, and in just 15 years. I wanted to call out to him, to take it back, but he was gone. My mind was getting fuzzier. The room was getting darker around me. All sounds started slowly echoing away from me into the distance. The last thing I heard was his voice. 15 years. I hope it was worth it. And then I was in total silence and darkness. Peace. What my death would have been had I not agreed to the deal. He was showing me, and it wouldn't have been so bad. But then, the light and noises started returning. Random shapes and sounds fused together in front of me. They slowly separated from each other and a structure started forming. Chaos and cacophony compounded into composition. Things started looking and sounding familiar. Recognizable even. Before I knew it, I realized that the lights and shapes were forming into the hospital room I was lying in. A doctor was standing over me. My family was there with him. They all looked so happy. "Congratulations," the doctor said to me. "The surgery was an overwhelming success." I don't want to write about the ease of my recovery, of how my life went back to normal, or how I changed my lifestyle appropriately, or even how I still see that man from time to time, watching over me, reminding me of what I have in store, always with that smile on his face. Instead, I want to repent, to acknowledge how wrong I was. All my life. I see it now. I see how selfish my actions were. I see how weak I was and how negatively my behavior affected those around me. Life isn't a game where you can do what you want all while ignoring the inevitable, and I think I always knew that. I knew I was letting them all down, that it would eventually catch up to me. But I didn't care. It was gluttony, plain and simple. It was a sin. I'll live my remaining 15 years as best I can, moment to moment. Maybe if I'm good, all will be forgiven. But I don't really believe that, repenting or not. No. I had already made my choice, and I know what's waiting for me. That pain, That emptiness. That hospital room. Forever. I raced across the hospital as fast as I could. I should have been heading home by now, but I had just been called about an emergency admission. I entered the private room, and I gasped at what I saw. In all my years treating burn victims, I had never seen anything that came close to this. The man on the bed had burns covering the entirety of his body. His skin was completely charred black. Blood and pus wept from the cracks in his destroyed flesh. What made the situation even worse was that he had to be physically restrained by two of the largest male nurses I had on staff. "Let me go!" he screamed. "I can't stay here. He'll come back for me." Jesus. Had this been the result of a premeditated attack?
Doctor,
A female nurse greeted me.
he keeps giving us false details, possibly due to the trauma. He seems to think that he's dead.
Date of birth, June 12th, 1972. Date of death, January 6th, 2014. The patient bellowed. "Now will you let me go? He's coming back. He's gonna find me." I had heard people say some crazy things when they had been on pain relief, but this guy sent shivers down my spine. Something was off. Something just felt wrong. I took a few more steps towards him, scanning the burns he had suffered. As I did, the whole thing started to feel like a weird, out-of-body experience. "What are you?" I heard myself ask. Suddenly, he stopped screaming and fighting against the nurses. He slowly turned to me, stared straight into my eyes, and calmly spoke. "My name is David John Cooper, and I am the first person to escape from hell." "8 months ago, my father started complaining about chest pain. I told him he needs to visit a doctor, but he flat out refused. He was always stubborn like that. I pretty much forced him to go, and I dragged him to a cardiologist myself, Dr. Kowalski. He tried to set him up with a thallium stress test, but my father again stubbornly refused. When my father left the room, I held back for a moment and told the cardiologist that he needs to force my father to go. There must be something he could do. Dr. Kowalski, rather rudely, told me that all he could do in this situation was advise. I left that office furious and slammed the door behind me. My father died 1 week later. I knew that what I did next was wrong. I knew that what happened was mostly my father's fault, that there was little that doctor could have actually done. But I was in mourning. I missed my father. I was frustrated. So, I put out a lawsuit against Dr. Kowalski for malpractice. I personally didn't think I'd even have that much of a chance to win, but the doctor didn't document my father's appointment well. I lied and said that the doctor refused to send my father for the thallium stress test. It was essentially my word, a lower-class working man who had lost his dear father, versus an elitist doctor who no longer respected the sanctity of life. Or at least, that's how the jury saw it anyway. There are far more details to the case that I don't want to get into the specifics about here, but Dr. Kowalski never stood a chance. I was awarded $4 million. When I left the courtroom after the final decision was made, I needed to walk right by the doctor. As I passed him, he grabbed my shoulder. Quietly, at a volume no one else could hear, he told me, "I think you may come to regret this, for better or worse." I kept walking. I headed outside. I went home, and I celebrated. For better or for worse, he told me. But I had $4 million. Things could only get better from here. I tried to convince myself that it really was the doctor's fault, that he deserved what happened to him. But I knew deep down that I was wrong. That I probably came pretty close to bankrupting that doctor, let alone what it did to his career. And, really, he had done nothing wrong. Many months passed. I got a nicer house and bought a $200,000 sports car. I could go on and on for pages about how great those few months were. How after struggling with money my whole life, I was finally free to do as I pleased. But that's not the story I wish to share. Things changed drastically for me. For the worse. And it all started with a car accident. I don't remember what even happened, whether it was my fault or the other drivers, but the driver's side door of my car was crashed in. It knocked me unconscious. Amongst other more minor injuries, it ruptured my left kidney, beyond repair. It would need to be removed entirely. I awoke in the hospital and saw 4 surgeons standing over me. I was hooked up to a respirator to help me breathe. I could tell immediately, based on the expressions on their faces, that something was off. "Hello," one of the doctors told me. His voice rang out with sarcasm. "You've sustained quite the injury. But don't worry. It's a good thing you have all these doctors here to fix you up, right?" He looked down at his clipboard. "A nephrectomy. Some would say that it's a painless procedure." One of the other doctors started laughing. "You know, doctors, professionals, who try so hard to help others, we owe them a certain amount of respect, am I right? A certain amount of honesty." It was then that I noticed 2 things. 1, I was in the precise same room that I had taken my dad 8 months earlier. 2, I couldn't move. Not even a muscle. I could barely even keep my eyelids open enough to see through. I heard a door open behind me. "Ah, hello, Dr. Kowalski," one of the other doctors said. He walked over and looked me up and down and then quietly said, "I told you you'd come to regret it." There was nothing I could say back. No limb I could move. "It's called curare," he said. "It's paralyzed you entirely, but you will feel the full intensity of any pain we inflict. Make no mistake, you'll feel all of it." In order to make his point, he grabbed a small palmful of my hair and ripped it out of my scalp. He was right. Make no mistake about it. It hurt precisely as much as you'd think it would. And I couldn't even remotely move. Not even slightly. "How did that feel?" Dr. Kowalski asked sarcastically. "I can tell by the fear in your eyes that it didn't feel very good. Listen." He went back into a fake professional doctor tone. "We're just going to make a painless incision down your lower left abdomen. Should be done in a jiffy. Then I'll use this little fancy tool. It looked like some sort of awful torture device from a horror movie. To cut around your kidney. Then we'll ever so gently remove it. That all sounds okay, right? If you disagree about any of this, this is your chance to speak up." A few of the other doctors laughed at that as well. "No? Well, I should also let you know that, as a cardiologist, I don't usually perform surgery. But I assume it's easy." He smiled at me. "Okay? Let's begin." He picked up a long, sharp tool. "See this? It's called a lancet. Don't worry, they're known for being painless." More laughter again from the other doctors. "I'm just going to cut down here, okay?" He made a tiny cut. Maybe just an inch. Then he stopped. "Good so far?" he asked. But it wasn't good. It was already excruciating. I was only now just beginning to understand what I was in for. He continued with his incision. The pain was like nothing I had ever imagined. There is no way to do it justice with mere words. Dr. Kowalski stared straight into my eyes again. "You look as though that hurt a bit." He leaned in closer and spoke quietly. "That incision was a 1 out of 10 on the pain threshold. Just wait until we get to a 10 out of 10. Some of the other doctors came in to help him at that point. With my head lifted up, I could see everything they were doing. They stuck some tools into the incision to sort of spread it open. I could tell already that I was barely clinging to consciousness. This level of excruciation seemed alien to anything I had ever envisioned. Dr. Kowalski was digging around inside with some other tools. "Oh, that's a shame," he said to me. "It looks like your lower rib is obstructing my procedure. It may have to go. What do you say, guys?" He looked back at the other doctors. One of those doctors had a smug look on his face and a bright smile. "I don't know, Doc. I think you could probably work around the rib if you need to." "Well, what's the fun in that?" Dr. Kowalski replied. Laughter again from the other doctors. He held up some terrifying saw. "This one is called a custodome. I'm not going to lie about this one. It might hurt. Just a little." I watched as he stuck the device in and aggressively hacked at my lower rib, and that pain was too much. It was blinding. It was surreal. Blissfully, I felt myself slip into unconsciousness. It felt like I was gone for hours, but it must have only been seconds. Dr. Kowalski was slapping me on the face to wake up. You're not getting off that easily," he told me. I don't need to go into too much more detail. I don't need to get into the specifics for when they finished removing my rib, or when they hacked through the tissue around my kidney, or how when, with my kidney still attached at some areas, it took the strength of 2 of them to grab it and rip it out of my body. I don't know what happened after that because I finally passed out again. I'm not sure if they tried waking me up again at that point, or if they felt that I had already been through enough. It must have been a day later when I finally opened my eyes. The first thing I noticed was the pain exuding from the left side of my body. The second thing I noticed was that I could actually move. Finally. It caused a stabbing pain throughout my body, but I was able to sit up. "It's probably best you sit back down," the doctor told me. I looked at him. I had never seen him before. He wasn't in the room with me during surgery. Before I could say anything, he spoke again. "You know, they say some people remember strange things when under anesthesia. Their minds can play tricks on them. It's best not to talk about such experiences with anybody. Because, of course, nobody would believe such tales anyways, especially against the word of 5 refutable doctors." The point was taken, loud and clear. I wasn't even angry or afraid. I was just desperate to leave. I just wanted to get out of there, more than anything. It's been 2 weeks since my visit to the hospital. I've just right now gotten back from my family doctor. He says I may have received a liver damage in my accident as well. It may even require surgery. And there's nothing I fear more than that. How that memory still haunts my days, nights, and dreams. I would avoid another trip to that hospital any way I could, but it might be out of my hands. It's best to play it safe. Maybe what I'm about to do will make everything all right. Maybe he'll even forgive me and I'll even forgive myself. Maybe I deserve to lose that kidney. Maybe I even deserve the horrors that I went through in that hospital room. Maybe there's no price for what I did all those months ago to Dr. Kowalski, but I'll give it a try anyways. It wasn't hard to sell the house, or the cars, or all the rest of the stuff. I took one last look at the check before I put it in the envelope. I looked at the figure. $4 million. I looked at the name it was addressed to. Dr. Kowalski. I sealed it in the envelope, and I dropped it in the mailbox. And maybe that'll make things right between us. But with the pain I currently feel in my liver as I hunch over this computer, I believe I'll find out very soon. For better, or for worse. January 12th, 1967 is known by some in the scientific community as Bedford Day, the first time that a human being was cryogenically preserved. I was there when it happened. I was 68 years old at the time. Yes, if you do the math, you'll see that I'm currently at the ripe old age of 118. If you count my frozen years, that is. If not, I'm merely 71 years old. But I was there with Dr. James Bedford's body when they froze him, and I arranged with his doctors to be their second attempt when my time came. It's humbling writing this right now, with the knowledge that I'm the oldest person on Earth. The first year of my life was during the 1800s, which must seem like horse feathers to you youngsters reading this. The house I grew up in didn't have electricity. I saw one of these computers once during the 1960s, but I was already old and barely knew anything about them. The way they're used now, I just can't wrap my head around it. The fact that invisible signals in the air can make music and motion pictures magically appear on the device in front of me, it's astonishing. I was in the American Corps fighting in the trenches during the last 100 days of the Great War. I remember how we cheered when the armistice was signed. I participated in some battles against the revolution in Russia, orchestrated by the Bolsheviks. Given how things ended up for us, I can see now we should have taken that war a bit more seriously. You see, I'm not sure any of you out there even know the same history as I do. I don't know if parts of the past have been hidden and covered up, or if I now live in an entirely different place. Where do I begin? 1969, I suppose. The moon landing. This terrified the Soviet Union, and I think it's when they first realized that they wouldn't be able to stand up against the United States in the long run. I see that your history books say the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. I'm shocked to read that, to be honest. And I'm even more shocked to see that there's no mention of the virus. In 1970, you see, the Russians engaged in biological warfare. A virus was unleashed in the United States that couldn't be stopped. It started with eczema, usually on your arms and legs. It was pinkish and flaky. It would be itchy at first, but would eventually spread and get much, much worse. People would be covered with agonizing sores all over their body, which would eventually start dripping blood, leading to exsanguination. It was pretty much a death sentence for those who got infected. The west coast of the United States was hit first, and entire cities were wiped out. It was highly contagious person to person, and there seemed no end to where it would spread. Were the Russians prepared for such effects? Were they holding on to a cure in case the disease spread all the way back to the motherland? Hell if I know. Because when the death rate reached 20 million in the United States alone, I made a visit to some doctors that I know. They told me that there was a much higher chance that my freezing would be successful, other than Dr. Bedford. He had been dead for days when they froze him. I was still alive. The question, however, was would there be a world left for me to wake up to? I remember them giving me a needle that would put me to sleep. And then, I was sitting up in a hospital bed and was told it was the year 2015. I remember nothing in between. Some doctors came in and explained what had happened to me. After my initial freezing, I was handed over to a company called the Alcor Life Extension Foundation. They're the leading company that professionally stores cryogenically frozen bodies. They currently have 149 bodies in cryopreservation. I was their first. I have the feeling that this business is now controlled by the American government, and that it was essential that this whole experience be kept secret. These scientists seemed as surprised as I did that their procedure successfully brought me back to life. They bombarded me with questions. What did you experience while frozen? Is your memory working properly? Is everything in functioning order? But I had just one question for them. What happened with the virus? The scientists looked at each other in confusion, and then one of them looked at me and said, "Don't worry about that for now." They told me that I'm now living in a very different world than the one I left in 1970. Did they mean technology-wise? Or that this really was a different world? Because I couldn't get any information about that virus, they refused to ever talk about it. In fact, they gave me an entirely new identity. And after many months in that facility, I was eventually allowed to leave. The money I had left with them in the 1970s had grown to a substantial sum, and I was perfectly fine to live off of it for the rest of my life. I was told not to mention anything that had happened to me, to just accept my new life. They didn't have much to worry about even if I talked. It would just be seen as the ramblings of an old man. I've used this time to try and catch up to this new world. I'm new to this stuff, but I think I'm getting the hang of it. I know the terms smartphone now, and tablet, social media, and I was even introduced to this website that I'm currently typing on. So, was the virus real and has somehow been covered up by all the world governments? I guess so. Is it possible that the freezing process has altered my memory in strange ways, and that the virus never really happened at all? Sure. It is possible that I'm still frozen and dreaming right now, and all of you listening to this are just a part of my imagination. Or maybe after being dead for 45 years and waking back up, it created some sort of science fiction type dimensional jumping. I suppose it's within the realm of possibility. But I just wish the scientists took the whole situation more seriously. Because there's a pinkish blemish that has appeared on my left arm. It's itchy for now, but I fear that it may get much, much worse. Son, we need to have a chat about internet safety. I slowly crumpled down onto the floor next to him. His laptop was open and he was playing Minecraft on a public server. His eyes were locked into the action. Comments scrolled down the side of the screen in a chat box. Son, can you stop your game for a minute? He exited the world, closed the laptop, and looked up at me. Dad, is this gonna be another cheesy, scary story? What? I faked hurt feelings for a second, and then grinned at him. I thought you liked my cautionary tales. He grew up listening to my stories about children who encountered witches, ghosts, werewolves, and trolls. Like many generations of parents, I used scary stories to reinforce morals and teach lessons about safety. Single dads like me should use all of the parenting tools at their disposal. He scrunched his face a little bit. They were fine when I was like 6. But now I'm older. They don't scare me anymore. They're just kind of dumb. If you're gonna tell me a story about the internet, can you make it like really, really scary? I squinted at him incredulously. He folded his arms. Dad, I'm 10, and I can handle it. Okay. I'll try. I began. Once upon a time, there was a boy named Colby. My son's expression indicated that he wasn't impressed with the terror of the introduction. He sighed deeply and settled in for another one of Dad's cheesy stories. I continued. Colby went online and joined several children's websites. After a while, he began talking to other kids in-game and on the message boards. He made friends with another 10-year-old boy named Helper23. They both liked the same video games and shows. They laughed at each other's jokes. They even explored new games together. After several months of friendship, Colby gave Helper23 6 diamonds in a game they were playing. This was a very generous gift. Colby's birthday was coming up, and Helper23 wanted to send him a cool present in real life. Colby figured it wouldn't hurt to give Helper23 his home address, as long as he promised not to tell it to strangers or any grown-ups. Helper23 swore he wouldn't tell a soul, not even his own parents, and set about mailing the package. I paused the story and asked my son, "Now, do you think that was a good idea?" "No," he said, shaking his head vigorously. In spite of himself, he was getting into the story. Well, neither did Colby. Colby felt guilty about giving away his home address, and his guilt began to grow and grow. By the time he put on his pajamas the next night, his guilt and fear were larger than anything else in his life. He resolved to admit the truth to his parents. The punishment would no doubt be steep, but it was worth it to have a clear conscience. He squirmed in his bed as he waited for his parents to tuck him in. My son knew the scary part was coming up. In spite of his tough talk, he leaned forward, wide-eyed. I spoke softly and deliberately. Colby heard all the noises of the house. The washing machine bounced around in the laundry room. Branches scraped against the brick outside his room. His baby brother cooed in the nursery. And there were some other noises he couldn't quite pinpoint. Finally, his dad's footsteps echoed down the hall. "Hey, Dad?" he called out nervously. "I have something to tell you." His dad stuck his head in the doorway at a weird angle. In the darkness, his mouth didn't seem to move, and his eyes were all wrong. "Yes, son?" The voice was way off. "Are you okay, Dad?" the boy asked. "Uh-huh," sung the father in his strangely affected voice. Colby pulled up his covers defensively. Is Mom around?" "Here I am." Mom's head popped into the doorway below Dad's. Her voice was an unnatural falsetto. "Were you about to tell us that you gave our home address to Helper23? You shouldn't have done that. We told you never to give out personal information on the internet." She continued. "He wasn't really a kid. He just pretended to be one. Do you know what he did? He came to our house, broke in, and murdered both of us, just so he could spend some time with you." A large man in a wet jacket emerged in the child's doorway, holding the 2 severed heads. Colby shrieked and gasped as the man dropped the heads on the ground, unsheathed his knife, and moved into the room towards the boy. My son screamed too. He twisted his hands defensively over his face, but we were just getting started with the story. After several hours, the boy was almost dead, and his screams had become whimpers. Then, the killer noticed the wailing of a baby in another room, and removed his knife from Colby. This was a special treat. He had never murdered a baby before, and was insanely excited about the prospect. Helper23 left Colby to die alone, and followed the cries through the house like a homing beacon. In the nursery, he walked to the crib, picked up the baby, and held it in his arms. He moved towards the changing table to get a better look. But as he held the baby, the crying died down. The baby looked up and smiled. Helper 23 had never held a baby before, but he gently bounced it in his arms like a pro. He wiped his bloody hand on the blanket so he could stroke the baby's cheek. "Hey there, little guy." The beautiful rage of sadism melted into something warmer and softer. He walked out of the nursery, took the baby home, named him William, and raised him as his very own. After I finished the story, my son was visibly shaken. Between ragged staccato breaths, he stammered, "But Dad, my name's William." I gave him a classic dad wink and tousled his hair. "Of course it is, son." William then ran up the stairs to his bedroom in a fury of sobs. But deep down, I think he liked the story. I set fire to several miles of forested terrain, and I got away with it. There's really no way for them to tell who did it. Thing is, raising that stretch of trees might not have solved the problem. Midwestern parents are often characterized as helicoptering around their children. But now that I have a kid myself, I think I'm starting to understand. Everyone here knows the truth, even if just on an unconscious level. The forest is still here. While cities have become fortresses, high-walled bastions of man, the primordial forest that covered the world for millions of years is still all around us in the Midwest. We surround our houses with grasses, bushes, and trees in an attempt to appease it. We carve what we have to and leave vast spaces of woodland untouched. More than anything, we never let children stray off on their own anymore, for we broke our pact, and the forest is watching. This time of year, human activity dies down. This time of year, you're more likely to be alone. It's chilly, the sunlit hours are short, and the forest hungers in the devouring days before winter's sleep. But it's not going to come after you so obviously. A few hours before a road trip we had planned to go camping an hour away, I noticed that my voice had stopped echoing. Checking the physicality of my voice was a ritual I always undertook before driving anywhere long distance, and I had never had the unthinkable happen a second time. The first time, I had nearly died. I had been small then, a child, with my grandfather. The experience was a vague collection of half memories of darkness, cold, and something out there that hated me. Now, 30 years later, I was standing outside my house, calling to the trees with no reply. Beside me, my son shouted at the trees too, and then giggled when his echo came back. He raised a mitten-covered hand at me. "Dad, why doesn't your voice echo?" I didn't answer him. The afternoon was white, harsh, dim in that way that only autumn days can be, and the trees behind our house swayed with the chilly breezes, hiding and revealing dark spaces between them as they moved. I stared at one of the blank spots as it shrank and grew innocently. The longer I looked, the more I felt like I was staring into something, and that I was being watched in return. It was hard to believe memories from so long ago. What had I really seen back then? The ritual of listening to my own voice had become a habit for its own sake, rather than one born of any lasting fear. I couldn't really call off a trip because my voice wasn't echoing, could I? A distant vibration moved through me, maybe from my feet, or perhaps from the air, and only just for a moment. It was just me and my son for the first leg of the trip. I did get in the car and start driving, but nothing felt right. As we pulled onto the interstate, I began to calm down. Really, what could happen out here at 60-odd miles an hour? As the trees rose on either side of the highway, my son laughed, touched the window, and said, "The moon looks weird." I couldn't see it from the driver's seat, but I did lean and bend a few times to get a better look. When I finally caught sight of it, I had to grab the wheel to keep from swerving off the road. The moon wavered between huge and small, as if we were looking at it reflected on the surface of a rippling lake. Looking that direction repeatedly also caused me to notice the trees below. They were shooting by with all the speed one might expect. Nothing I hadn't seen before while idly watching out a car window on a long drive. But the trunks of the trees flying past, and the dark spaces between them were beginning to blur together. They began to move too fast for my eye to catch and run with. I started staring directly at them. Beyond the passenger side window, the forest became a rapidly undulating curve that went up and down at a slower rate than the passing of the trees themselves. It was enormously disconcerting, but I couldn't help but repeatedly look. Slowing down slightly made the pattern begin to dissipate, while speeding up brought it into better focus. The curve became a static blinking span, approximating a circle pointed on the sides. An uncomfortable feeling of looking upon a closed eye grew in me. And then, the eye opened. Beyond were stars, darkness, and stars. I knew in an instant that what happened to me as a child had all been real. This was some sort of anti-existence, perhaps the universe as it had been before sentient life. Wind tore at my hair, despite the windows being shut. It was cold, colder than anything I had ever felt before, except once. That unliving eye was filled with ice and stars, and it hated me, and all the more so for escaping its grasping clutch once before. It remembered me. Something about it was hypnotic, and had been from the start. The only thing that snapped me out of it was my son screaming in terror. I blinked, aghast, and finally looked away. The speedometer was dead on 117 1/3 miles an hour. In seeking the right speed to perceive the gate, I had somehow accelerated past the red line. The car shook violently all around us, and my son was rightly terrified. But I couldn't slow down. That was the one thing I remembered from 30 years before. My grandfather had gone over 120 miles an hour to try and save me from whatever force it was that lurked out there in the ancient world. We could only see each other, only interact at certain speeds. That was the key. Whatever it was, it could never rest, and all parts of it were always in motion through an emptiness colder than death. Silhouettes began to emerge from that eye, infinitesimal at first, as if the gate was unthinkably far away, but growing as they ran parallel to us. They were set forward in their blazing gait, running so fast that we could see into them at purple and blue and white stars burning in distant voids. And they matched pace with us while slowly moving closer and closer. A hill made the forest jump, but only for a moment, and the runners were right back alongside us.
What are they, Dad?
That question struck my nerves like a hammer. They weren't my imagination. My son could see them too, and I was beginning to feel tired and drained. The same way I had felt before at the approach of just one of those entities. I couldn't speed up this time. If I passed out, we would no doubt crash. What else was there? Did they have us? Was it over? My son was buckled up. That much I had always insisted on. You're going to have to trust me, okay, buddy? He was crying, but he nodded and tried to act brave. I locked the doors and told him, "Hang on tight." As entranced as I was, I had seen something in the formation of the gate. The first time I had seen one of those entities, it was already here running after me. This time, I had gotten to see how they arrive here. Just then, I sighted a dirt bridge to the other side of the highway up ahead, and I slammed on the brakes. The car squealed and turned at random. Whenever it threatened to go too far left or right, I let up and tried to stabilize. Still, decelerating took forever, and the runners were upon us in moments, clawing at the doors. The night sky seemed a blight upon our windows as star-filled voids hammered at the glass. I let the car turn on the road, hit the gas, and shot across the dirt bridge right into the traffic going the other way. A numb chill fell across my senses, but I accelerated with traffic, gaining speed as fast as I could. Cars honked at each other and swerved out of our way. Curious, we had been alone on the other side of the highway. It was as if it had waited for the perfect opportunity for us to be isolated. Glass sprayed over me. My son was screaming, but I was blind to everything but the lights of the dashboard directly in front of me. Darkness drained away all of my other senses, but I kept the last of my sight focused on the speedometer. 117 1/3 miles an hour. Just past the red line, going the opposite direction. We hit that number and I put on the cruise control. To my left, out of the shattered driver's side window, curving darkness rotated the other way. Ink drained out of my sights, leaving me to blink and stare as the hate-filled silhouettes were torn away from our car and flung back into the vortex as it circled in on itself and closed. It was the pattern that had opened it, and it was the pattern that reversed and had closed it. I let the car slow and drifted for a while as I tried to recover. Finally, I pulled over, and of course about a dozen people had called the police. I sat there in shock and let my crying son explain until one of the officers demanded that I speak. None of this was possible, he shouted, and I must have been insane the way I was driving. I had even shattered half of my windows driving the way I had. When I showed him, he simply backed away and waved off his partner. "This is, out of our jurisdiction," he stammered. "I'll take care of the calls about you speeding. Just get out of here." He let us go for the same reason that I went back and burned down those woods 2 weeks later. It's not a scar. Not exactly. But I have a feeling the blackened, frostbitten skin in the shape of a clawed hand on my left shoulder will never heal. She told me her name was Tanya. She said she lived in LA like me and that she was 24. Her picture was cute, as was her personality. We met online and things were going pretty well. That first night we chatted and flirted for 3 hours straight. I thought I had found something with her. Her picture was of a young woman with light brown skin and chocolate brown eyes. She had a smile that would knock the wind out of you. Tanya. But the thing is, I've been burned by people online before, so I tend to tread carefully. I'm a little ashamed to admit this, but I sort of catfished her. I sent her a picture, but it wasn't me. I found it on Google Images and uploaded it. She told me I looked pretty cute. Back and forth we went, sending pictures, building up this relationship. But the entire time I realized I was doing the very thing people had done to me before. I was torn up about it, but I chose to keep going with it. Tanya was clever, witty, and compassionate. Our evening conversations evolved into sending texts throughout the day. I desperately wanted to FaceTime her, but I was afraid to show her exactly what I look like. She never brought it up, so neither did I. We just continued with our messages and texts and the occasional sharing of pictures. With every new picture she shared, I felt more alive and more connected to her. I started looking forward to her texts every day. No matter how awful my day was at work, I knew I had this relationship to look forward to. Eventually, our relationship became physical. Well, as physical as it can be online. She started things off by sending me sultry pictures. It continued from there, and we eventually were having more and more intimate phone conversations several times a week. Say what you will about online relationships, but to me, this one felt real. It felt right. One day, she asked me if I'd like to meet. I remember writing back to her, like, in person? She sent back a laughing emoji and said, of course. Then she sent me a picture of her in lingerie and said that she'd be wearing it. I went crazy. We decided on a place. It was a hotel a few miles away from my house. Even though I felt like I knew Tanya, I wanted to be careful. Plus, I kind of live with my parents, so bringing her over just wouldn't work. She said the same thing about her living situation anyways. So, we found a spot and planned to meet later that night. I showered, got ready, and dressed to impress. I also bought her some flowers. I headed over to the hotel a little bit before the time we agreed to meet. I parked across the street and then waited for her to show up. Part of me wondered if she would actually keep her word. Then, I saw a car pull up, so I slowly walked across the street. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. It made me pause. I quickly ducked behind another car in the parking lot. Immediately, something felt wrong. The car was full of people. One girl and two men with her. They all got out of the car and headed upstairs to a hotel room. Their hands were full of bags. One of the men was even wearing a Michael Myers mask on his head. And that's when I saw her. It was Tanya. But it wasn't Tanya. She sat in the driver's seat and stared down. Moments later, my phone buzzed. I'm here, sweetie. Where are you? I'm almost there, I replied. Tanya wasn't Tanya. At least, not the girl from the pictures. She was much older. I could see her wrinkles from where I was crouched. She was wearing all black, including black leather gloves. I'm getting a room, she said. Just meet me upstairs, okay? I watched her get out of the car. She took out a large bag and a baseball bat, and then went into the room next to her friends. I took a deep breath and walked back to my car. She messaged me again. Are you almost here? I can't wait to meet you. I turned my phone off and drove away. I don't know what would have happened, of course, but when you message someone online, you never can be sure who they really are. Thinking about this situation makes me sick and afraid. You would think by 2017, we'd have learned our lesson, but I guess I didn't. So just try to be careful out there, okay? Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is a time between the stomachache-riddled Halloween and the wondrous excitement that is Christmas. It's a time for families across the US to come together, to share in copious amounts of food, and to scream at whatever sports team is currently on television. As if we needed a special day to eat a lot of food or to scream at a sports team. A lot of people tend to pass off Thanksgiving as just another day, especially if they live alone or have to work. That was me, for the most part. Ever since I graduated high school, I rarely had time for holidays. Work kept me busy most of the time, and I had moved quite a distance from my parents, so making time to spend with each other was hard enough as it is. This year, however, I had finally saved up enough paid time off from work to actually host a Thanksgiving meal. It was just going to be my parents and I, but After all these years, I wanted to have some family time. My mother offered for me to go to their place, but I wanted to have them over instead. They had only visited my house once, and my mother cooked every Thanksgiving, so I wanted to try it for a change. Now, admittedly, I'm not much of a cook, but in the world of the digital age, with multiple recipes and tutorial videos at my fingertips, I figured how hard could it be? The town I had moved to would be considered small. We had only a few gas stations, a couple outlet shops, a Chinese restaurant, and a meager supermarket. I got a job working in one of the nearby warehouses. You know, those random warehouses you see in the middle of nowhere on road trips. Yeah, those warehouses. I could have chosen to work closer to my parents, but the pay and benefits, as well as an instant promotion thanks to prior schooling, was a very solid selling point for me. I wanted to get everything I would need for Thanksgiving as early as possible, without it spoiling, so I waited a week before to go shopping. When I arrived at the poor excuse for a supermarket, I was shocked at how empty it was. Not only were there hardly any items on the shelves, but the few customers in the store gave off an almost post-apocalyptic vibe. I tried my best at scrounging up what I could find and made my way towards the meat section to get the last item on my list, the turkey. Looking upon the barren coolers filled me with a sense of dread. Almost everything aside from hamburger meat had been taken. Then, at the far end of one cooler, I saw it. The last turkey in the bin. I quickly rushed over to it and plucked it out of the semi-chilled air. As soon as I set it down in my cart, a shock jolted my hands. Another customer had crashed his own cart into mine. Looking at the man, I couldn't help but think of any other word but disheveled. He wore a thick but tattered-looking winter coat that hung low near his knees. His pants had what appeared to be oil or grease stains all over them. His shirt was riddled with holes, and his face was sporting a disgruntled look hidden behind patchy stubble. The man then demanded abruptly that I hand over the turkey. I comically looked around as if I didn't know who he was talking to. He once again pushed his cart into mine and told me that he had forgotten to grab it while he was waiting in the checkout line and was coming back for it. I replied with, "How is that my problem?" Upon hearing my remark, he attempted to reach into my cart for it, but I quickly spun the cart around and started walking away. Maybe he was in a bind like myself and needed this turkey for his own family, but being an asshole won't help you. I headed to the checkout, and as I was placing my items to get scanned, I glanced around. That man was still standing near the frozen food section, just staring at me. I could almost feel the rage behind his eyes as I stood near the checkout. After paying and making my way out of the store, I looked one last time at the man. He still hadn't moved, and his eyes simply followed me until I was completely out of the store. When I got home, I unloaded my car. I then took the time to enjoy my mini vacation. I played a few video games, watched some TV, and did a whole lot of nothing for the rest of the day. I decided to head to bed early that night, so I could get up early and clean the house. At about 1 a.m., I was awoken to a noise coming from outside my house. It sounded like scratching on my window in the other room. Groggily, I sat up, trying to focus on the sound that had disturbed my sleep, but as soon as I sat up, the sound subsided. I remembered the weather reporting high winds late in the evening and early morning, so I thought that the whipping wind had caused the noise. I got up from bed and walked over to the other room opposite my bedroom. I glanced out of the window and saw nothing but darkness. I shrugged it off and went to the bathroom to relieve myself. Just as I was leaving the bathroom, I heard a new noise. It was tapping, but this time it was coming from my front door. I stopped in my tracks as I faced the door. Soft, rhythmic tapping sounded from the other side, quiet enough that had I been sleeping, I wouldn't have noticed it. Slowly, I crept towards the nearby window to try and peek through to see what was causing it. When I split the blinds, I saw him. A large man wearing a long tattered coat and stained pants. He was just standing there, tapping on my front door ever so softly. I felt the blood drain from my face as I began to recognize him. I hurriedly got up and grabbed my phone, calling the cops. When I did this, the taps almost instantly turned into pounding. The door vibrated with each impact. The police told me to go hide myself in a room and to lock the door until they arrived. I immediately ran into the bathroom with my phone. As soon as I shut the door behind me, I heard my front door crack and splinter away from the frame. I felt my hands begin to shake as I stood clutching a phone in one hand and a plunger in the other. I know it may sound stupid, but it was all I had in there. On the other side of the door, I could hear him rummaging through my house, opening and closing doors. For a few minutes, it sounded like he was breaking everything in my house. I could hear him knocking over things like my bookshelves and my desk in the living room. Then, I heard him stomp over to where my kitchen was. I could hear silverware clattering across the floor as more destruction was being caused. A minute passed by, and I heard nothing. Then, I saw the doorknob on my bathroom door begin to turn slightly. Luckily, I had locked it as I closed it behind me. Those few minutes felt like the longest moments of my life. I then heard a light tapping on the other side of the bathroom door. Then, silence. About 10 minutes went by and I heard a knock on my bathroom door. They said it was the police, so cautiously I opened it and was greeted by an officer. I informed him of what had happened, and while he called it in, I glanced around my house. It was completely trashed, and my kitchen was a train wreck. The officer then asked me while I looked around if anything was missing, and before I could even process anything clearly, I absent-mindedly said, "The turkey." I then relayed my encounter earlier today at the supermarket, and the officer nodded understandingly. He was constantly reassuring me that everything will be okay, and that the other officers were currently out looking for him. In the meantime, the officer searched the rest of my house, while I tried my best to tidy up, but the officer came back empty-handed. About a half hour had passed when the officer informed me that another unit had located a man fitting the description I had given, about a quarter-mile away from my house. When they searched him, they found a large hunting knife, a 9mm handgun, and a turkey underneath his large coat. I'm not sure why that man wanted that turkey so badly. All I know is that I'm probably very lucky to be alive today. And I think that when my parents get here, we'll probably just go out and get some nice Chinese food for Thanksgiving. Take the I-87 north from Queensbury, Vermont, then the 28 up through North Creek. Keep going, and you'll pass through the town that doesn't exist on any map. My headlights probed the first of the ramshackle buildings through the smoky dusk. This was no isolated farmhouse or wild hermit hiding from the world. A real town, with shy street signs peeking out from tangled vines and ivy, looming apartment buildings that might have been abandoned for years, and ramshackle houses that looked as though they were grown from the earth rather than built from it. The place was materializing around me, appearing so suddenly that I couldn't imagine how I had been blind to it a moment before. I slowed to a stop as an old man crawled his way across the street. I was growing impatient, and was about to honk when he staggered up to the car, clattering his knuckles upon my window. "Why are you here?" Perhaps it was just his frail voice breaking in the cold wind, but it seemed as though the strain of panic lay just below the surface. A depressed man, wrought by anxious doubt. screaming at himself in the mirror before pulling on a tight smile for the rest of the world to see. That's what I was looking at outside my window. "I don't even know where here is," I answered him. "Is there a hotel where I can get a room for the night?" "No hotels." The old man was turning in a slow circle. I followed his gaze, noticing a growing number of faces framed by faded curtains, watching us from the surrounding buildings. Motel then. I'm not picky." "No motels. No inns. No beds, no breakfasts. Nobody stays here." More eyes. More faces watching us. Old men standing on the street corner, not bothering to disguise their gaping stares. Doors opening to reveal ancient women who might as well have been the direct descendants of prunes. Wrinkled hands wringing together. Bleary eyes straining through their spectacles. Not a soul younger than 60. And all staring with the horrified fascination of one witnessing a brutal car accident. My nerves were like fireworks, exploding with the undefined tension in the air. I nodded curtly and began to roll up the window when the old hand shot through the opening, grabbing me by the collar. "Take me with you. Don't leave me here. Please," he begged, real tears welling up from the sunken wells of his eyes. I shoved him back on instinct. The window slid shut, but he wasted no time clutching the door handle and rattling it with all his might. I would have thought it was dementia if it weren't for the heavy silence of all those eyes. "Please, you don't know what it's like. Don't go, don't go, don't go." And on, uselessly pounding his weak flesh upon the metal door, crumpling to the ground beside my car, and wailing like an insolent child. I shifted into drive and put my foot on the gas, but a sudden sharp whistle gave me pause. A police officer had appeared beside me, cropped gray hair and piercing black eyes, like a man who remembers the worst of war with warm nostalgia. He roughly pulled the pleading man away from my car before rapping a quick, authoritative burst of knocks on my window. I rolled down the glass once more, keeping an eye on the discarded man who still trembled with silent, heaving sobs. "Was this man giving you any trouble?" the policeman asked. I rapidly shook my head. "I was just asking for directions, that's all," I said. "Well, just stay on this road. It'll take you right through town and you'll be on your way," the policeman said. "Actually, I was looking for a place to—" "This road is the one you want," he repeated. "There's nothing else for you here. Understand?" "Yes, sir." The black eyes turned away, and I was able to roll my window up once more. The rest of the eyes, those peeking from buildings or glaring from the street, they remained fixed on the scene. I was only too thankful to be driving again, but I didn't even make it a block before a scream made me slam into another halt. In the glow of a street lamp, unmasked before dozens of eyes, I watched the policeman's baton fall for a second time, then a third, and a fourth, each wet, bludgeoning thump, accompanied by shrieks of agony. The old man who had first addressed me was being beaten to a pulp in the middle of the street. The zealous baton alternated with quick, vicious kicks from the policeman's steel-toed boots. It wasn't the screams which haunted me, though. It was the cold, impassive silence from the policeman. No warning, no threat, not even sadistic satisfaction. It was just another day for him, another duty. Those black eyes turned away from the writhing form on the ground. A second later, all the eyes from the entire town seemed to be on me. I stomped the pedal, tearing through the stop sign, not fast enough to avoid hearing another gut-wrenching scream echo from behind me. I couldn't just leave, though. It's my fault what happened. I should have let him in my car immediately, but there was nothing left but to hope I wasn't too late. I circled around the block, and by the time I got back, the eyes had all turned away. Curtains were drawn tight again, Doors were closed. The old man was the only one left, still moaning and whimpering in the street where he had been left. I stopped the car and wasted no time in leaping out. His decrepit frame was so emaciated that I had no trouble lifting him into the back seat. He was still alive. Barely, although there was a catching rattle in his chest when he breathed, and it looked like a few of his ribs had caved in. One of his eyes fluttered open for a moment. "Please." He had to spit blood between his words. "Don't stop. No matter what you see, don't stop until the last house is gone." I had no intention of staying any longer than I had to. The curtains were just flitting open again, but I was already back on the road. I braced myself against the impending sounds of sirens and the inevitable chase that never came. I didn't see a single other car on the road as I glided through the eerie twilight. The only sign of life was the regular beat of windows. At each block, a new set would snap open with mechanical precision. Old heads like cuckoo birds sprang out in unison. Next, the windows from the previous block would slam shut, continuing the steady rhythm like the incessant pounding of drums. The rhythm didn't change, block after block, but gradually, the faces peering out did. The further I went, the older the inhabitants became, shrinking and decaying into loose folds of yellowed skin. Then, this too gave way, until precisely I found myself being watched by faces so ravaged by time that I could clearly see bleached bone and hollow sockets turning as I sped along the road. Even the buildings here were in various stages of collapse and ruin, almost as though I was driving through the inexorable span of years. The houses were just beginning to thin and give way to wholesome shelters of trees when I glanced behind at my passenger. The shock forced me to slam my foot on the brakes, barely avoiding swerving off the road entirely. The gradual decay of the town was mirrored on my companion. Sagging flesh had dripped from his frame entirely, and the solemn skull behind me was preposterously balanced on a heap of splintered and broken bones, ancient wounds which never healed. Don't stop." Words like trickling dust escaped the skull. But I had already stopped, and the longer I ruminated on that unavoidable fact, the longer I remained frozen in static terror of what was to come. The rhythmic pounding of the drums had returned. Windows, doors, opening and slamming, then opening again to unleash the remaining denizens that time had forgot. Lurching, shambling, and then springing to life with blasphemous vitality, the inhabitants of this carnal realm were closing around my car. Ragged skin fluttered in the unfelt breeze, and white talons of bone raked the ground to pull them ever closer, vacant stares fixated upon me. And always that infernal drumming, which mounted into the crescendo of a macabre hymn. "Take us with you," a lone shriek at first, but quickly taken up by the rest. "Don't leave us here." The engine lamented my efforts to start the car again. A tense rattle, then a sickening crunch like the mashing of rusted machinery. Had it aged with my passage as well? Had I? There was no time to stop and think. I leapt into the open night, brisk air heaving into my lungs as I scrambled up the hill towards the woods. Drumming, ferocious and wild in intensity, yet retaining its unerring rhythm. I had the oddest sensation that I was listening to my own pulse, and as I pushed myself harder and faster, I could hear the drumming keeping pace with my racing heart. It didn't matter though. Nothing mattered, except the last lonely house, which I was swiftly growing level with, and the figure which was emerging to greet me. It was the policeman, baton in hand, gray-haired and stern, and living as I had seen him last. The baton was tapping along with the impatient drums, and as I drew level, I could feel the hesitancy in my pursuers. "Still looking for directions?" he asked, a coy smile playing around the corner of his mouth. "No, sir. I wanted to say so much more, but that was all the breath I had in me." Just passing through, are you?
Yes.
Need a ride? His smile was growing. I didn't like how many teeth it showed. The drums had stopped. The crowd had stopped. My car started somewhere behind me in the darkness. A flash of confusion passed the policeman's face. I liked that considerably more than the teeth. Don't you dare! But I was already running. Back down the hill, back towards my car. The pounding of the policeman's feet behind me, but it was so quiet compared to the resounding drums a moment before. The uncertain crowd parted as the policeman's thundering approach, but I was practically flying now. My car never went below 10 miles an hour, but the passenger door was wide open, and I launched myself inside. The slam of the door behind me was the first beat in the resuming drums. All at once, the crowd was screaming again, drowning out the shouts and the threats from the pursuing policeman, mounting and mounting back into that hellish cacophony, and then, just as swiftly, dwindling back to nothing as the engine celebrated its triumph. The old man in my car, or what was left of him, he drove me to safety that night. It's almost morning now, and we still haven't stopped. But just as soon as I work up the courage, I'm going to have a whole lot of questions to ask him. I think I'll start by asking what the name of that town was. I can't leave my bathroom. About 30 minutes ago, I got out of the shower and dried off. I put on my clothes, opened the door, and walked out, only to find myself back inside my bathroom, staring at the now closed door. I stopped and tried to rationalize what had just happened to me. I convinced myself somehow that I had simply imagined that I had opened the door and stepped out. So I tried again. I pushed the door handle down, opened it, stepped out, and yet again I found myself inside my bathroom, standing in front of a closed door. This has happened every single time I've tried to leave. I keep my phone with me in the bathroom when I'm showering. I live alone, so I like to keep it in there just in case. The very first thing I did was call my parents. My dad didn't pick up, but my mother did. I tried to explain the situation to her, but she couldn't seem to understand how I was trapped inside my bathroom if the door could open. She seemed convinced that I must mean my bathroom door's lock was broken and I was trapped inside. Regardless, she said that she would be over as soon as possible. She only lives a 15-minute drive away, so she should be here at any moment. I'm sitting leaning against my bathtub, looking upon my open bathroom door into my hallway. I opened it this time, but I didn't try to step out. Everything on the other side of the door looks normal. My bedroom door is closed just as I left it. The stairs leading down to the other hallway and the front door. Everything's normal. The door is now shut. I don't have any recollection of how it shut, when it shut, only that it must have happened in the last few seconds after I wrote that last paragraph. I just read and reread that paragraph. It's proof that I'm not going crazy and just imagining this. My mom just texted me to ask if I'm in the house. I said yes, of course I am. I'm still in the bathroom. That's the whole reason I called you here. This is what she sent back. Why aren't you saying anything? She said. What do you mean? I replied. Are you even in there? She said. Yes, I'm still here. Where are you? I'm standing outside the bathroom door. I've been calling your name. I don't understand. I can't hear anything through the door. I'm going to open it. I can see my landing, my stairs, my front door, but no mom. I tried to walk out, but it was fruitless. I'm now back staring at the closed bathroom door again. My mom tried the handle of the door from her side, but apparently it won't open. She found some tools to unscrew the lock. She says she's doing it now. but I still can't hear anything. I can't even see the handle moving. Okay, Mom just texted me to say that the lock is taken out, but the door still won't open on her side. She looked through the circular hole in the door where the lock was, but only saw my bathroom, empty. There's no hole on my side of the door. The handle and lock are still intact. I have no idea what's happening, or how I can get out. After much convincing my mom that I am in fact in here, she said that she's calling someone to possibly knock the door down. I'm worried though. I'm worried that once they do, they will find an empty bathroom and I will yet still be here, trapped inside. I forgot to bring my charger in here. My phone will die at some point. I'm already on 24%. When it runs out, I might lose my only point of contact with the rest of the world. I don't know what to do. Mom left to go get help. I'm sitting down wondering what I could do. I tried to break the door down myself. I knew it wouldn't work, but I had to try. I remember reading once online that you shouldn't use your shoulder. You should try to kick the door by the lock because it's the weakest point. It still didn't work. I'm not sure any part of this door has a weak point now. My next choice was to try the bathroom window. It's small, and I'm not sure if I'd actually be able to fit out of it. Scratch that. The window won't open either. There are locks on the window in my house. You can lock them with a little key, but I never received any when I moved in, so I've never been able to lock them. But they're locked now. The window also has one of those white plastic cheap blinds covering it. I ended up tearing it down. It pulled some of the plaster down with it, but now I can get at the window better. It's directly above the toilet, so now I'm standing on top of the lid, yanking at the window handle. But it won't budge. Wait! It opened! I didn't notice how dark it was outside. It shouldn't be this dark. It's only the afternoon. I looked around, desperately trying to see anyone. There's no one around. Everything looks kind of muted. I can't describe it, nor can I describe the deep-seated feeling of dread and wrongness as I look out into my neighborhood. My instincts are telling me not to, but I stuck my head out to look down to where I could possibly drop out to. The window is closed. I never felt myself move, but my window is now closed, in front of me. Even the plastic blind is back in place. I'm sitting on the floor now, as far away from the window and door as I can get. I'm starting to feel sick. Mom came back, along with her work friend. He helped her unscrew the hinges and remove the door, but I'm not in there. They can't see me. My mom sent me a photo of her inside the bathroom. It was empty. She thinks that this has just been a joke and is refusing to reply to my texts or answer my calls. I'm on 14% battery now. I don't know if I will ever get to leave. This might be my only chance to say goodbye to my mother, and she won't answer her phone. I've ripped down the shower curtain, and yet I'm staring at it right now, still hanging up, hanging over the side of my bath. I looked out the window again. I think I heard a rumbling. A low, quiet rumbling. I haven't touched the window since. My phone is now on 2%. If I get out, I will try to update this post. If you don't see an update, then just assume I'm still in here, and I'm still trapped.